And you're all members of the Nashville Public Library Writers Circle. And this is our second meeting. And my colleague, Will Akers, the co-founder of the Writers Circle, and I join in welcoming you and ask you to come back to these quarterly meetings. I think today is going to be an exciting moment. I look around the room and I won't wade into the waters of introducing everyone who's here, but I will tell you that among you are some distinguished, award-winning writers in addition to the two distinguished guests that we have. As some of you know, for 40 years now, I've done a weekly television program called A Word on Words. And over that period of time, I've interviewed several of you who are in the room. And I have interviewed both of our guests today, Rodney Crowell and Jack Hurst. I'm going to be very brief in this introduction. I could go on about each of them forever. I've known Jack forever, to his regret. We were colleagues together as journalists. I've known Rodney a short time, but have come to admire, respect, and really love him and love his work. For those of you who have read Chinaberry Sidewalks by Rodney Crowell or Born to Battle by Jack Hurst, this introduction really needs to be brief. For those of you who haven't, you're about to find out about two truly terrific books, wonderful books by two authors who write with both elegance and eloquence. With that said, Will, the floor is yours to conduct this interview. Well, thank you all very much.
We're starting a little ahead of time, but we got plenty of, yeah, very good. I've read both books. I'm really excited to be doing this because both books are great. What I think is interesting about them is they are both very compelling reads, and none of the stuff was made up. And when it's fiction, it's really easy, I think, to write something in, well, it's not easy. It might be easier to write something when you get to make it up yourself, but when it's memoir or when it's nonfiction history, you don't get to make it up. You've got to figure out a way to make it compelling. And that's one of the things I want to talk about tonight, this afternoon, today. That I think that's really intensely difficult. I've never had the nerve to do it, so I want to find out how they did it. Well, I'm going to talk to them, they're going to talk to each other, and then after a little while, y'all will get the microphone and we'll ask some questions. And then if you all want to interrupt each other at any time, go for it. If I ask him a question that you want to answer it too. The first question I want to answer is, what told you, each of you, this was going to work, that this was an idea that you wanted to invest the time into? Because I think one of the most difficult things about writing is deciding, this is the one I'm going to do. I'm not going to do those four, I'm going to do this one. And so what told you that this book, that this idea was going to be worth the time it would take to do it? Jack.
I guess basically this one was pretty easy because I had done one just before on the same subject except earlier in history on General Ulysses Grant and Nathan Bedford Forrest at Fort Donelson. And so that happened just by accident. I mean, I wanted to write a book about Fort Donelson, and I began to realize after I'd gotten well into it that publishers in New York would not have heard of Fort Donelson. I mean, it wasn't Shiloh or some big battle, and so I had to figure out some way to sell it, and I suddenly realized that here we had two of the most famous names in the Civil War on the same battlefield, and I said to my agent, I said, is this how we sell it? And she said, that's how we sell it. And so then, having done that book, then I got really interested in following those two guys through the next 18 months before Grant finally wins at Chattanooga and goes east to face Robert E. Lee. And Chattanooga was a pretty good ending point because that's where Forrest also threatens to kill his commander and goes off to the west. He doesn't work with the Army of Tennessee anymore until very, very late in the war.
There are a lot of things in the true story like that, threatening to kill his commander, that you had to have thought, oh good, I can keep this. This is going to be great, and this is going to help the story.
Well, it's a good place to end. Yeah, it is.
And how did you know that this is the one you wanted to devote the time to?
Well, it just seemed to logically follow the other one, and it seemed almost a no-brainer, you know.
And Rodney?
Well, there was a pivotal moment with my mother where, for those who haven't read the book, my mother and father met at a Roy Acuff concert in Buchanan, Tennessee. And my book is not at all about any career I've had. The one thing I knew about that I wanted to achieve if I could write, and I had to find out if I could write because I didn't know. I could write songs, but I didn't know if I could write sentences, paragraphs, chapters. But I knew that there was no upside or any real, I had no compelling reason to write about this career I've had because it just seems like, self-importance, love letter to fans about oneself, which I didn't want to do that. But it so happened in the career that I've had, I actually introduced my mother to Roy Acuff after my father had died, and an exchange that happened between my mother late in her life, but to see her become an 18-year-old girl again in the presence of this artist whom she admired so much. That was the moment where I said, I really need to write about this, and I can't write about this in song form. And from there, to me, it was poignant and powerful enough for every intellectual reason I had not to write the book to just melt away continuously over and over and over again, where the story really told itself. I was just helping it along.
Mm-hmm. What was I'm going to ask you both the same question. What was the sort of the history of getting the book written from sort of start to finish? Because in your case, it took a long time.
It took me 7 years to practice of writing and throwing away, writing and throwing away, writing and throwing away, and keeping, maybe the first 7 years I worked on it, maybe 25% of that is in the final book. But it really did take that long for me to feel a rhythm and to have just enough of a narrative voice to hang on, and just barely hang on, honestly, until I got the right editor. And then with the right editor, I was able to, I'm a pretty quick study, but I was lucky that the right editor at the right time, and I give him a lot of credit. I had the tenacity, but he's the one that showed me where the narrative was. And from there, then I spent 3 years of really constant labor.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 10 years total in the book, but really the last 3 years are what shows up on the pages.
And Jack, what was the story? What was the kind of the story of getting your book written?
About 4 years. And then that last year, when I submitted the manuscript, then I too had a great editor, and she told me that there was no way to publish a book that long. If you look at that, it's a pretty substantial book anyway, but I relieved it of 40,000 words, and which was not any easy thing to do. But it was basically just it didn't lose any. It was just tightening the language, and which is a rigorous process. But I managed to get that out. It took me probably 6 weeks to do that or more.
How many words is the book that is here?
Oh, I guess somewhere 125, 130.
So you took out a lot.
Yeah.
And then how did you find your editor?
Through a friend, through another writer who was very supportive and had an ongoing conversation with during the writing, who told me that there happened to be an editor living in our midst, Gary Fiskett, John, whom I didn't know, but my friend Mary Carr said, her colorful way, she says, oh, there's an editor lives near you who's going to die with his boots on. You need to know him. And so Claudia, my wife, who, being more resourceful than me, got his phone number out of the internet or something. So I called him. And as luck would have it, he was a fan of my songwriting, so eager to read the manuscript, Maybe if I'd have just had not had a history of the work I'd done, that door may not have flown open, but that's how that happened.
And then, Jack, how did you find your editor?
My editor is a woman I've never seen. She was my editor she was my line editor as well as the overall editor on Men of Fire, and then she was the overall editor who asked me to, by that time she'd been promoted, and she asked me she was the one who asked me to take out the 40,000 words. She didn't actually put a number on it, she just said it has to come down considerably, and so I'm the one who came up with the 40,000 words. And then she put me with a really capable line editor, and her name is Laura Heimert, and his name is Alex Littlefield, and between them, when they say line editor, they mean line editor. I mean, they go over every word. They ask you to back up everything you've got, and so. But that just makes the book much, much stronger by doing that.
Did they suggest some of the 40,000 words? Did they give you some ideas of things to take out, or they just said make it shorter?
A few things. I think they did say we don't need so much of this, or we don't need so much of that. And they were always right. I mean, they were right. Once they said that, you said, oh yeah, right.
It's nice to have somebody help you out.
Absolutely.
Well, this question for you is a more recent question. In your case, it was a longer time ago. When did you know or decide or get the confidence to say, I can write? When did you figure that out?
Who says I have?
Some publisher.
Well said.
Well, because I think that's something that everybody worries about.
To me, the carrot should always be out here, and I can write better, I think. Otherwise, but to answer the question maybe directly, I really am not sure, that I really have crossed over, because I've written one book. So, the people that I admire so much, I had this thought during that. I said, I've been writing songs for 30, 35 years. I said, as I was writing this book, I said, I wish I'd been writing books for 35 years. I might be able to accomplish something here, But I did use that. I thought about, writers that I admired. I sort of used that as a carrot in a way, as they've been working at it for so long. I said, I better strive for something that's worthy, in case I someday get to shake hands with somebody I admire,
How long did it take you to feel like, and what did you do to kind of get in control of the prose while you were writing? or while you were learning to write in the middle of writing this book?
Well, I always trusted my self as a storyteller. I come from a line of storytellers, bullshitters, going way back. You know, my mother's family, my mother's side of the family is just crazy, wild storytellers. And so I always trusted my sense of story, and I know where to step on the gas and where to back off, and I know the arc of a story. My problem was the order that the words go in, and it took me a long time to get confidence that I had any real understanding of what order the words really go in.
Mm-hmm.
So for years and years and years, I was guessing. Sometimes I guessed right,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times I guessed wrong. I'm guessing I guessed wrong, and but practice, you know, I just kept practicing, kept believing I could do it, and the words started to talk to me a little more clearly, and started moving a little more into the right order.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I said, when I got to work with the editor, I remember getting the first 30. A really important thing happened to me again with Mary Carr was the ongoing conversation that I had. She's a very, you know, renowned writer, and I asked her before I started the editing process. I said, "What's the biggest mistake that your students make?" And she said, "Falling in love with what they've written." And so I took that into the editing process with him. When I got the first 30 pages back from Gary edited, and being, you know, songwriting, you can use large metaphors, or bigger the meta, you know, like a bird on a wire or like a rolling stone. You can use these big metaphors, and you've got chord changes, you can bend the words, you can change, you can make a metaphor work with a song, whereas when it stands alone on a page, you know, it glares.
No music.
Like glaring red, overperformed sentence, you know. And when I got those first 30 pages back with lines drawn through all my brilliance, I let it go. And lo and behold, a narrative surfaced. And so after those 30 pages, I told my editor, I said, "Hang on. I'm going to revise the whole manuscript based on what I just learned. It's going to make your job easier."
Right.
So I revised the manuscript a couple of times based on that, what I learned. And truly, that 30 pages really helped me understand the order I wanted the words to go in.
Can you go back to there and tell them what were some of the things you learned off of the first 30 pages that he had made notes on?
Well, I learned that, you know, the natural-born songwriter that I am it's only the work ethic that I developed over the years of writing songs, the willingness to go back to work every day. That's, to me, that was the only thing really applicable other than a sense of story and a sensibility, a aesthetic I have about how words sound to me. But to let go of that overperformed, self-important description of a gunshot, you know, actually when I saw lines through it and stepped back, I was like, oh, you know, thank God somebody told me to take that out, you know, that kind of thing. And
So, Jack, what about you? When did you first kind of get an idea that you could do this?
Well, you know, every day you start over. I mean, you know, but I had the idea that I wanted to do it real early. I mean, that's what got me into the newspaper business and all that. I mean, and very early on, I remember as a teenager, reading about Nathan Bedford Forrest, saying, I would like to write something about him someday, you know? But country music really played a big part in that too, because that was another thing that I wanted to write about. I wanted to tell people that this art form that at that time was generally denigrated, looked down on by, you know, the intellectual world, that I wanted to tell them there was something to it, you know.
Are you talking about at the time, of Civil War time, or?
No, I'm talking about when I was a kid, and
Okay,
you know, in the 1950s.
Which was a really good time in country music.
It sure was, absolutely, and you know, I tried to for my local paper. I wrote some for my local paper in the teens, in my teens, and I tried to write some stuff about country music then, and you know, they really didn't want it, but finally when I got to the Tennessean, and I every now and then they'd let me write a story about country music, and then after I came back, I spent 2 years in the Army in the middle of my Tennessean tenure, and when I came back from the Army, I asked John if I could cover country music, and at that time nobody was covering it day to day, and he looked at me like I'd gone crazy, but he said, well, you know, I guess we could let you try it 3 days a week if you think there's enough there to cover. And I said, well, there are 40 studios here in town turning out records as fast as they can do it, so I think we've, and then he really launched me by putting me on the front page 8 days in a row, 8 days running, with a story about country music. And from then on, it was, but I really got, that was my dream then, was to be able to tell these people, you know, these people that they only saw on the front page when they shot somebody or something like that, that there was a lot more to them than that.
Just killing.
Yeah, right.
Probably a good thing to know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
When did it took you 4 years to do your book, and there was a lot of research involved. Do you have any thoughts to tell people what to worry about when you're doing research, or what to look for in doing research, or just thoughts on research?
Well, the biggest thrill of research for me is to, you know, when you're dealing with the original sources. If you're not dealing with some filter, you know, somebody else has written about this guy, and so you read what they've written, and you let that, if you can get to the heart of what they were writing about, if there's some manuscript or something that talks about what the best thing that I did in the biography of Nathan Bedford Forrest that I did several years ago was that I sat down and went through every copy, I mean microfilm of every copy of every Memphis newspaper that was done from the time he arrived well, actually before that, the 1840s all the way to 1861. And but it wasn't indexed or anything. So I had to read every ad, every column of every day's paper. I mean, but it produced all kinds of great things that people had just totally forgotten about. They didn't know about Nathan Bedford Forrest. It was in none of the biographies before. His city council career and all that stuff.
So you found out things no one else had ever put in the book.
Right. And so I was really proud of that. But it took a long time. But the joy of coming across in one of these columns, suddenly finding a column of you know, what happened at the city council last night, and when Forrest had, you know, gone off on one of his tangents or something, was just wonderful. I mean, it was great.
And your book, Everything Happened to You, did you have to do research to get the book written?
A bit. You know, I went back to Houston and walked from Avenue P to the Emmanuel Temple Church to see how far it really was. I wrote it was 40 blocks. It was 24. But, you know, that's typical of me. I go do the research after the fact.
Oh, after the book was printed?
Yeah. I wonder about that, you know. 24 blocks is a long way, though.
Well, you were smaller.
Yeah. It would.
Did you do anything else, like call people up or do any kind of? Well, let me ask a different question. What did you do to jog your memory, to come up with the past from so far removed?
Funny thing about memory to me is once I started working with it, and you know what, my memory, you know, I can't tell you anything about 2008. But, you know, it's like I always liken it to the first time you jump out of an airplane. I suppose if you jump out of an airplane 100 times, the first time is the one you're going to describe and the one you remember more clearly. So my childhood is vivid to me, always was, and it, you know, maybe because I was reluctant to grow up. It seemed to me memories, when I started working with a certain memory, I had this image that other memories would get in line and go, hey, me next, mm-hmm. Remember? Mm-hmm. And it just snowballed that way.
Physically, how did you actually approach gathering it and collecting it and arranging it?
Just write it down on a yellow legal pad as quickly as I could, and then put it in the computer and try to make sense of it.
You knew the ending of your book, which was Roy Acuff and your mom, and you knew the ending of your book, which was Chattanooga. How did that help the writing process, knowing where you were going?
It helped me because my father was violent. I grew up in a domestically violent family. It's historically, you know, going back generations. Crowell and Willoughby's hit. That's what they did. They just hit. When they couldn't express, they put fists through walls or teeth. Mm-hmm. But because I knew my mother and father's the redemption, you know, they redeemed themselves in their own way. You know, it had nothing to do with me. The arc of their redemption was to me the real end of the story, which to write about my father hitting my mother would be self-serving if I didn't know the redemption that happened that had nothing to do with me, that was the arc of their own lives, that they stayed married after what they put each other through when they were young. And so I knew that it wasn't gratuitous for me to write about alcohol abuse and domestic violence and just how despicable my father could actually be, because I knew that I was going to be able to make the reader love that man the way I did. Well, I assume that I have done this.
And how'd you do that? Because character is such a big deal in a story. How did you make us feel that way?
Compassion. The compassion that I felt for my father, you know, the love. I mean, you know, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I knew my father was a great man. I knew that he, in the end, I mean, he disappointed me early on, but in the end, he delivered big time. And I had that experience to write to. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it just opened me up to write about what really happened without having to flinch or without feeling like it was self-serving.
Jack, why do you feel like the ending, knowing where you're going, is important for a writer?
Well, I've tried to write a few things where I didn't know what the ending was, and all I did was just write in circles. You know, it's like, you know, if you have no goal, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you know where it is, then you can zero in and you pick up everything that leads you to that point, and it it automatically eliminates the other stuff so that it won't get in your way.
Did you ever doubt where your ending was, or did you always say that's it?
No, I guess in every one of the books that I've done, I knew what the ending was before I started. I mean, I figured it out before I started.
And we're always right.
Well,
Handy.
yeah, I mean, the ending may not wind up being exactly the way you conceived of it when you started, but it's in the ballpark,
And if you were going to tell me in a sentence or two what your book's about, what's it about? I'm going to ask you the same questions. You can kind of...
It's about U.S. Grant and Nathan Bedford Forrest in the Western theater of the Civil War and the exploits and vicissitudes that they had to put up with. I mean, because see, both of these men were unlike everybody else in the hierarchies of either armies. These two men were from far below the upper crust. Mm-hmm. And all the other men were from the upper crust. And so they looked down on Grant and Forrest. And so the things that these two men had to overcome to become the great generals they became was just, they were, none of their peers or superiors had to overcome those kinds of things. And yet, there's this unmistakable correlation. You can't miss the correlation between the fact that these two guys were the two from below, mm-hmm. and yet they were the ones who excelled. They were the ones who outdid all the others.
Well, there's a line in here, let me see if I found the right one, as it said, because Bragg's long and disastrous stint with the Army of Tennessee was followed by service as Davis's principal military advisor in Richmond. Mm-hmm. Well after the war, Davis would tell a Tennessee governor that he himself never understood Forrest's worth before the contest was lost. By then, the deposed Confederate president seemed to recognize that this failure stemmed in considerable part from the short-sightedness of Bragg and commanders like him. Mm-hmm. But it never would have occurred to Davis that the oversight was more generally attributable to the myopia and class consciousness of the Dixie elite. When I read that, I thought, that's the book. Mm-hmm. Right, and it also applied to Grant as well. Right. And I thought, how fabulous for you that you were able to find that about mm-hmm. both guys, and then you knew you had a book. Right. I was guessing. But to me, I wrote on my notes, that's the crux of mm-hmm. the whole ball game. Mm-hmm. Is it important as a writer to have something you can hold in your hand and say, this is why I'm telling this story?
Yes, but you may not be able to put it in your hand at first. I mean, it may come to that as you're doing it.
Talk about that, because all the writing books always say, oh, you have to write down your premise of what you're writing about, and you got to know, and you got to tape it up and write to that, and I disagree. And
I do too. I absolutely
You got to find it as you go along.
Yeah, that's right. But you have to have a general idea of where you're going, but that's all. I mean, if you're trying to write to an outline, forget it, because you're going to be so bored by the time you get, 3 chapters in that you're quit. I mean,
So how would you, talking about not writing an outline or writing an idea of an outline, how would you actually do it to get here from all the zillion facts that you knew or had in file folders? How would you organize it to get to the printed page?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. All I know how to do is just, the only thing I know how to do on a computer is write. That's all I know how to do. But I can, that's where it all comes together for me is in the computer. I get it, I spend I'm very, very inefficient at it. And so I spend all kinds of time. I don't have too many file folders. I should, but I don't. And so what I do, I will sit there. Sometimes I will go 2 days trying to look for something that I know I read somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so, so, you know, the book could have probably been finished in 2 years instead of 4 if I kept file folders.
Well, there's a line here in the book. On the night of September 20th, Forrest men slept on the field. Nearby was the captured hospital with a pile of amputated arms and legs, 12 feet high and 20 feet across. So that was one of those things you read
Yeah,
somewhere.
Right, that's right.
That you had to go
yeah,
find.
Yeah, I had to go find to back it up, put a footnote in there.
So when you sit down and write the page for the very first time, are you writing it from, I've got these thoughts that are in my head, or are you sitting there going, well, there's this fact and this fact and this fact, and I'm sticking it all in?
Well, I have a few things there that I've, you know, found and stuff, but I also, I wind up having to use some of these things that I know are out there somewhere, you know, and then I have to go find them. But I like to write the thing down first so that I can, you know, but I try not to get too far along before I go find it for sure and make sure my memory of it is correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Rodney, tell us about the opening of your book, New Year's Eve, 1955, because I'm assuming not everybody has read it. How does the story start? Why did you decide to start it there? Was that always the beginning?
No, the beginning comes later, really, but you know, my sense of drama and storytelling would suggest to me I'll start with a bang, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And
So what happened in that scene?
my father took me out on my 5th birthday. This is a rite of passage. My father took me out and taught me how to shoot a .22 rifle on my 5th birthday. That was where it started. He got me my first gun on my 12th birthday. Out of the 7 years, I don't know what I was supposed to pick up, but it was a one and only party my parents ever had in their house. There was my parents did not have a social life, or people didn't come into their house. If there was anything social, they went out to it. There was a great deal of disentitlement and shame in my family, deep shame. And this one party was irregular. But I knew what happens when my father started chasing beer with whiskey. It got ugly, and this one particular party, I got a .22 rifle out, and I had no intention to use it, but it misfired. I put a bullet in the linoleum floor, and it broke up the party. Now, it was in later years as an adult, that was my first success. You know, I really, for my childhood, it seems like I should have had a whistle and a striped shirt, that I was a referee, really. So I've become pretty creative at dealing with my parents. To keep myself alive, my basic need was to keep them alive. And there was always the indication that they were about to kill each other. And I became pretty adept at breaking up the danger,
Mm-hmm.
from hitting myself over the head, from accidentally discharging a firearm in a small living room, 4 by 8 just about, and to hitting myself over the head with a Dr. Pepper bottle.
Now tell that story. You were in the back seat of the car
Yeah.
at the drive-in
Just
restaurant.
The thing about my parents' insanity was that I learned that if I could go more insane than them, it would stop them. And I would do, It's like, in memory, there are 3 or 4 key incidents where I succeeded in that way. And later on, I had to get some professional help to disentangle my sense that I could make everything right by becoming more insane than it is. So also writing the book was another way to work that out.
So even if the book hadn't ever been published, it would have been worth it to get down on paper.
Well, honestly, I had worked therapeutically with a professional to iron out a lot of this stuff before I ever started writing it. That was how I was able to approach it with compassion for both myself and for them. And to me, as you asked Jack, if you ask, my book is a love story.
Mm-hmm.
I was only child, myself and my parents. It's a love story. It's a three-way love story with compassion and redemption being, the gist of it.
And then, as Jack said, he figured it out as he went along. Did you know that at the beginning, or did you figure it out as you went along?
No, I was figuring it out as I went along.
So you don't have to know.
I knew the end, though. I don't think I could have figured it out on the way if I didn't have a destination I was getting to.
Mm-hmm. You said these were 3 or 4 of the 5 key events in your yellow legal pad. Did you have lots of events that you thought about writing about, or that you did write about, and then you took them out? I mean, because it seems so the book reads so well. The book is really good and beautifully written. And it just seems like, well, these are so obvious. These are the ones you would put in. Obviously, he just did this, and there it is. But in fact, that's not the case. But were there lots of different things that went in and went out?
Well, no, not the key things that were a lot of wasted words about key events fell by the way before the right ones found me and found the page. But it was just constant rewrite for me. It's back up and start over, revise, keep digging. I think I did not really answer your question. I've thought about this since, and this is the way it works. It comes to you. I think when I really knew that I could write the book is when I realized I'd spent, month and a half on one paragraph and had to abandon it and come back and spend another month on that paragraph. And when I finally said, I have the stamina to wait this out. I can do this. I have the stamina.
How'd that feel?
Felt good. And from there, it's, I think from there, the rhythm of writing said, okay, I'll help you, and it started to come.
Well, Jack, and Rodney, the same question, but Jack first, is how did you deal with doubting your ability to get either this book or anything actually done? Am I any good at this? How did you handle the doubt?
I don't know. I guess the only way you handle it is just by doing it. By writing something. At least
writing something, even if it's bad.
Yeah, at least you've got some place to start from because you're going to rewrite anyway. If you don't rewrite, you're just a typist.
One of the things I've found with my students is occasionally there'll be people who literally will not turn in an assignment in an entire semester and get an F. Because they're so afraid it's not going to be perfect, they won't write anything.
Right.
And I kept saying, I can help you. If you write garbage, we can make it better. But if there's nothing on the page, but it was amazing to me to see people
That's right.
not be able to write anything because it wasn't going to be perfect.
Yeah. I think that is a real stumbling block that you've got to get over, is this idea that, once I put it down on the page, it's there, I've written it in stone. Well, you haven't,
Well, you wrote by hand, and it automatically looks bad because it's by hand. And if you write with, in my case, I'm left-handed, and if you write with a pencil and you're left-handed, you smear the graphite and it just looks even worse. But if you have a computer and you print it out, it looks good. Oh, nice, I'm done. So how did you deal with the doubt along the way?
I've been thinking about that question since you asked it, and I think I was blessed in a way in that when I started, I had an overinflated sense of how good I was. And so much so, and Claudia, my wife, has arrived, she would know that when I first started writing those 10 years back, I'd go around and read hey, listen to what I just written. I'd read, a paragraph that I'd written, or I'd hold somebody down and read them 6 pages, And by the end of writing that book, I wouldn't read it to anybody. It's like I really thought I was really good, and by the time I got finished with it, and especially when I went on tour and promoted it, I went from really thinking I was a great writer to feeling pretty average, and which is a good place for me. So when I write another book, I'm gonna have to figure out how to screw my courage up to have an overinflated sense of myself so I can do it again.
What do you have rules? You said you're talking about sentences. Did you have any rules that you used to? I need to make sure this sentence works, and I'm not going to do this, or I'm going to do this.
I don't have enough of a understanding of the rules of language to even form that. I mean, really, I'm a primitive. It's just blind luck that the words
Well, let me read something.
found the right place. Honestly, I mean, I'm not being falsely modest about that.
This I circled.
I don't know how you do it.
This I thought was fabulous. It says, he also, you chased the DDT truck. I've got another friend that did that. I just
Miles
thought,
and
wow,
miles.
that was amazing. In the summertime, the truck would be spraying down the street against mosquitoes, and all the children would run through the nice, cool mist. So let's see. It's unlikely that Mr. Sharp had planned obsolescence in mind when choosing this design. In fact, using tar paper to avoid an accumulation of waterlogged asbestos suggests good intentions. But all things being equal, a handful of volunteer Texans stood a better chance of holding off 1,500 Mexicans at the Alamo than a house with a flimsy facade had of surviving the elemental onslaught of southeast Texas weather. And is it Jacinto?
Jacinto.
Jacinto City, when the rains came, male men needed diving suits. That's a great sentence.
Right.
Male men needed
Right.
diving suits.
Right.
That's just
Well, that's
fabulous.
right. To me now, that's right on the edge of being too much.
Well, I liked it a lot.
Right.
Now, why do you say it's on the edge of being too much?
Honestly, I'm a performer,
Mm-hmm.
and natural born, and the thing that I think writing is a form of performance, storytelling. It's just that the writers that I admire, and Jack, I felt this way writing your book. I say, he does that so quietly, with the eloquence and the elegance of the quiet sentence really appeals to me, and I don't necessarily think, being a performer, I think I'm more drawn to the sometimes the overperformed sentence, because I am a performer, and writing is such an intimate experience between the writer and the one reader, that audience of one, that look, it's an ongoing thing for me to learn to do this better and better and better, and I aspire now to be able to write more quietly. And I hear that sentence and I go, well, that sounds pretty cool, but it's not quiet,
I really think that one of the most powerful things to a reader is to be able to read a sentence that is exciting all the time. And I think that one of the things that I finally came to think was exciting is something that I saw a lot of in your book, and that is this thing of coupling real poetic, elegant, first-class words with the vernacular stuff right out of the street, out of the gutter.
Yeah.
You put those two things together, and you've got power in the language, and it was in there. I mean, that book is chock full of it.
Do you want to talk about those pages? Well, now might be a good time. We've got a handout, and each guy has read each other's couple of pages, and so you all have them, and if you don't, they're up front. In Rodney's book, it's page 132, and on. So what do you want to tell us about that?
Well,
Or ask Rodney?
well, I mean, I'd be happy to ask him if my idea is correct on this. I mean, it seems to me that at the top of page 132, that first paragraph, about the burning leaves and your grandmother piling up the leaves around you, burying you in the leaves, and then finally, when your excitement waned, she lets you light the match that'll burn the leaves.
Yes.
To me, that first paragraph is just, it's reporting. It's wonderful language to use in reporting, but it's reporting. But then in that next paragraph, you begin to get into the poetic.
Right.
From the blaze, sparks sprang like newborn shooting stars in reverse, defying gravity and rising far above our heads. A hoot owl on the telephone pole harumphed his approval. Trees leaned in for a closer look. Houses kept a respectful distance, but the wind couldn't resist the urge to see what it could do, hence more sparks. The pyromaniac in me today can be traced to the moment Grandma Katie passed me that match. So, and the way you do that, I mean, you personify the wind and the hoot, all that, but you start out gradually. You do it, you don't just jarringly do it. First, there's the hoot owl, which is something live. And then you move on, to the trees and the houses and the wind and stuff. I mean, to me, that's just masterful.
Well, thank you. That's one. The paragraph before that you mentioned is some of my favorite writing in the book, describing my grandmother in that moment in 1954. But that paragraph is something that my editor and I thought it should come out because, one, there was no hoot owl. And we know that, that these things did not actually happen. The fire happened and these things happened.
Right.
They happened in my watery reality. And I thought, well, this is misleading because this didn't happen.
But further down, just before you get to the end of that page, you're talking about my 4-year-old imagination. So then, all this makes even more sense.
Well, that's what he said. It is your 4-year-old imagination, and the reader is going to understand that.
Right.
So that's...
Yeah. And the whole, about Grandma Katie, and then about Spitshine Charlie, the shoeshine man. You talk about the love you felt from them, and the closeness of that bond really shows up on page 135 when Spitshine Charlie dies and they bring you his shoeshine kit. I mean, obviously, your bond impressed everybody, everybody around who saw the two of you. And then that is another. You do the same thing with Spitshine Charlie that you did in the Grandma Katie thing. I mean, you first show what he does, what he did, how he did it, and how. But then you raise it to another level, and even when he's talking, when he's talking about how he does what he does. When he says, it ain't no different if a man be black or white, rich or poor. If he ain't no good to himself, ain't no good for nobody else. That's what I need my little partner, meaning you, to remember one day when he thinks of old Shine dead and gone. I mean, he is giving you a work philosophy there, and you're transcribing it, but then you raise it, you exalt it by showing exactly the poetry in what he did. You know, the worth of the man is what you're showing there, and it's really, really good.
Thank you. Wow.
Anything more to say about the pages?
Well,
Or
there's
Nash, back to be your turn.
when he at the end. I mean, I wrote down a note here when he was talking about how the love of those two people, Grandma Katie and Spitshine Charlie, and then the love of his daughters, and how it finally brought him to the redemption point. And I wrote that you have graduated to a place where you can thank your hard-scrabble parents for the great, crushing, yet matchlessly glorious gifts of both life and an individual identity, in the face of the fact that that was almost certainly not on their minds while they were doing it, while they were giving it to you. Suddenly you seem able to see that they, like you, were just people trying to cope with what they had been given by their elders. And it's as if you had to find out for yourself how hard the job of being an adult was before you could fully appreciate them.
Yeah.
That's what I took from it.
That's pretty much it, too. I mean, really. I just loved them.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
to me, it's a love story. I love Spitshine Charlie. Loved him. Loved my grandmother. Loved my mom and dad. Love's a pretty powerful thing, you know. It's
Yes.
Just
right.
and I guess I was just trying to give it a voice.
Right.
Talk about
you got one.
voice. I want you to talk about Jack's pages, but talk about the importance of voice in writing, both of you. I want to hear what you think about it, why it's critical on the page.
Well, I might be waxing a little bit, you know, to try to articulate that, but you know, you are aware of you know, when you open a book and you go into this world that's been created for you, it is a voice that's telling you this story, and you know, the really good ones that we can't put down, that we can't wait to get back to, where life is in our way while we need to get back inside this story. To me, it is about the voice that the writer has or has created or has accessed. And I don't know truthfully if it's a sound. It seems like a sound to me, but it certainly is a tone. That voice is a tone. And the ones that you really love and just keep you in there, just have that tone.
In your book, was it easy to find it and keep on track, or did you ever wander off and lose the voice?
I wandered off. I wandered down dead ends, you know. I wandered way off for long periods of time. And sometimes found my own way back, and other times it was help that brought me back.
Songwriters, and that is that it comes from somewhere else, and it's not really something you can take credit for, but it's something that when you suddenly, you know, when it suddenly comes out of your hand or whatever onto the page, and you suddenly realize that that's it, that sounds good. Well, it's not something you can take credit for, I don't think. I mean, I think it's something that's given to you, because it doesn't, you know, it's hard to get to that place where you can actually bring it through your hand, but it's not really something.
Can you get back to that place when you need to?
Not all the time, no. I mean, you know, you just keep, except by continuing to try.
Right.
That's the only way you do it. I mean, but, you know, I really think it has a lot to do with just loving words, because that's one of the things that really influenced me very, very early in my life about country music. They were just some of those, and they helped make me want to write. I wanted to write something else. I didn't want to write songs, but I mean, there's a man sitting right back here who wrote a line that it's been emblazoned on my memory forever. Bobby Braddock wrote a song that the opening line of it, and to me it's like the opening of a movie. You can see it. It says, Mama never had a flower garden 'cause cotton grew right up to our front door. I mean, what class of people you're talking about and where it was and everything else. I mean, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. But I mean, those things, I really think, and by paying attention to those things and loving those things, just like as well as loving the words in the books I read, I think taught me what it's supposed to sound like, so that I would know when something that had come out of me was good. But I mean, it's not anything. I really don't think it's anything you can take credit for. I really don't. I feel like it does come from out there somewhere.
Well, let's talk about something that he can't take credit for.
I just want to add to that,
Yeah.
Jack. I always, with songs, I've always had this feeling that they exist fully formed and fully written somewhere other than this physical dimension that we're in. And that when you do your job, you bring them from there to this shared experience we're having. And the really good ones, you get most of them. Or maybe all of it.
Yeah.
I suppose, something, some great work of fiction or, perfectly written, Anna Karenina or whatever we would use, that I would imagine that existed the way, He Stopped Loving Her Today existed,
Right.
and it came through this medium or this. But I think you can take credit, and I think we as artists should take credit for, I don't think those works get through from the other side unless you're wholly dedicated, unless your work ethic is day in, day out work ethic. And because I believe inspiration such as it exists, that it goes looking for those whose dedication has made them an open channel for that and worthy of that kind of inspiration. And if you have the dedication, as you do, I think, we should take some credit for that, because it didn't, this book didn't go looking for the guy who lives down the street from me. It went looking for you. Found its way in here,
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, tell us about the pages that you've
All right,
got.
now, see, this illustrates the difference between a research artist and a wing it at all costs who doesn't read his emails until 2 days before he gets here. I read the book and then got the pages to read, so I reread them, which was, to me, was a good way for me to read these pages. Of course, I didn't take the notes that you did. It was someday, But I started thinking, in having read the whole book, as I read from 142 to 145 again, and you're framing Braxton Bragg for us. To me, it framed the whole premise of, I'm going to kind of stumble around here and get around it, but first of all, I'd never been compelled the Civil War has always been one of those things that I had no interest. Maybe it was the the cliches of the rebel flag, and I had a certain amount of judgment for the good folks who were going around and dressing up and reenacting the Civil War. I thought it was an awful time in our country's history. And your book really brought that screaming into my consciousness, how bloody and how horrific. I'd never considered 24,000 deaths in a day at Shiloh. And later,
Chickamauga?
Chickamauga,
Yeah,
the
right,
42,000.
Right.
Like that, I hadn't really allowed myself to consciously own that knowledge, and I just kept it at arm's length. But from the minute I started reading your book, it was like a door opened into a world that I realized I'd been denying myself something really important to know. I mean, and the having read the book, to go back to see you describe, to me, that what cost the Confederacy dearly was this class consciousness that you wrote about, that the arrogance and the which is so on face value not really in the Southern man's blood, that that kind of the airs that the West Pointer, that the military hierarchy took on, in the class consciousness, where they could, and even to Jefferson Davis, even to where they couldn't see who the real worker bees were in this thing. And in the same, in another way, with the Union is the kind of class consciousness that kept Ulysses Grant sort of his arms tied behind his back. But it was an insight that I'd never considered, that it's just arrogance for one thing, and it's misinformed, and I'm not getting to the technical part of the writing here, and I apologize for that, but it also, great art. It to me, the timelessness of these pages in the book, it set me to thinking that this is a country divided, I mean, so bitterly divided as to destroy each other, in the South, to destroy a generation, basically.
Right.
But it's still happening today. The divide, it's shifted, it's more subtle, it's the violence, it's like, I don't think we're going to go out tomorrow and start, bayoneting each other. But as I was reading it, I kept thinking, it's alive. It's whatever it is in the human condition and spirit is still alive. That you're wrong, I'm right, I'm better, you're a class below me. It still exists, and it's on television now, and that's something that kept coming back to me over and over and over again in this. But Bragg, more than he came from the soil, and he got above his raisin. Yeah, cost him dearly. It cost the Confederate cause dearly, and to me, it's I don't know if you were consciously writing about him in that way that laid the foundation for how it all collapsed, but to me, it's all here. Where it goes to, and that guy was an asshole.
Yes, he was.
Yeah,
he was. He was.
And you made that clear. A misinformed asshole. But I'm sorry that, I don't read technically, I read emotionally.
Mhm.
And I guess I really write emotionally, and
Right.
some technical stuff comes in later to help out. But, you know, my emotional reaction to this was, you know, I live in Thompson Station. That war went on in Thompson Station. I drive through Franklin all the time. That war went on. The ground that I travel, the roadways that I travel, this was going on, and it's the beauty of books. It's like suddenly I'm traveling, you know, up Franklin Road now, and I always knew that the war went on, you know, the Civil War went on there, but now I'm inside it because I'm inside this.
Mm.
And thank you, I really enjoyed it. It's truly my first time to go into the Civil War with any sense of compassion. I know I call Mr. Bragg an asshole, but I do that with compassion.
Right. Absolutely.
Forgive him, Lord, for he knew not what he was
Yeah,
doing.
that's right. That's
You know.
right. He didn't. That's right. Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you.
You're so
Thank you very
generous
much.
to read words that I've written, and I'm just speaking in generalities about this, but to me it was a world that I was so grateful to enter, and I didn't want to crawl out of it.
Well, thank you.
I give this to my father-in-law,
Oh,
and then
thank you. Thank you.
thank you.
Jack, because the section here is about character. Talk about the importance of character when you're telling a historical story.
I think that's what makes history come alive. If you don't have that in there, nobody's going to, you know, it's just going to be, nobody's going to read it very long. I mean, they're not going to, but when you make the people, you know, when you get your conception of what they really were, what they were like if you met them today on the street, that's what makes it, you know, and how they rub shoulders with each other. I think that you know, when you start explaining the inside of a character, then people can either identify with him or just the opposite, but they feel something about the person, and you got to make them do that.
Now, you may not know the answer to this question, but this is one of my favorite favorite things in the whole book. This is about Bragg. I want to know, where'd you find this out? He never checked a book out of the West Point. He never checked a book out of the Academy's 8,000 volume library.
One of his earliest biographers had that in there. Yeah.
Because that tells you a lot about the guy.
That's right. He wasn't going to learn anything from anybody else.
Still talking about writing, of course, but changing tone a little bit. You've been writing since before computers.
Oh yeah.
How has the computer changed writing?
It made it a whole lot easier because, you know, if you're a rewriter, it's a whole, and that's what you got to be if you're going to be a writer. That makes it a whole lot easier to do that. Whereas when we used to have to do it on copy paper down at the, that was awful. And sometimes, because it was awful, the copy paper you turned in looked like, you know, some hen had been at work there or something. You know, I mean, it was awful. But one of my greatest inspirations as a writer was one of the guys down there, Charlie Fontenay. And you remember, he used to send, he would turn in original stuff that he had done himself, and there'd be like one X'd out phrase or word on a page. I mean, that's how good he was, and he was lightning fast too. He was amazing. He was just an absolutely amazing person in a lot of different ways. But he was a great writer. He really was.
Then do you write longhand and then put it into the computer?
Yes.
And then do you print it to rewrite it? What do you do? How do you get to the next step?
Well, I print it out I don't read what I've written so well off the computer screen. I have to print it to read it. It takes on another tone when it's actually something physical that I'm holding in my hand and reading it. Things glare at me more from an actual printed page than they do from a computer screen.
Of course, if you've got a hard copy and your computer dies, at least you've got your book.
Yeah, that's true. You know, I don't think I being a, you know, I actually learned to type a little bit writing this book. You know, if I'd have been on a typewriter, it wouldn't have happened. You know, I couldn't have revised that much. Couldn't have been done. You know, there wasn't enough paper.
Right.
You know, it's amazing to me that you know, a real writer can sit down and write on a typewriter. It amazes me.
Well, one of my theories about writing is that it doesn't matter how you get to the printed page. You can type it, you can write it with a quill pen. It doesn't make any difference. And my students always wonder, maybe are they doing it right or are they doing it wrong? And I think it doesn't matter. Just get it done, whatever works for you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Have you all got advice that you'd like to give a room full of writers? Like, what did you wish you'd known at the beginning of your book that you know now? Or just in general thoughts that they might want to know?
Wow.
Run your spell check.
The things that I was told, you know, don't fall in love with what you've written. I don't think there was anything more powerful that was said to me about it than that. That's all I can
That's
come
pretty
up
good. Jack?
I guess I would just recommend that you read great writers, you know, from either the past or now. And I don't mean just I think you should read great writing all over the place, whether it just is in the area you think you're interested in or not, because the more you read outside the area that you're interested in, the more it's going to enrich what you write about what you are interested in, because you get more context that way. I mean, you know, and pay attention to things like songs too, because those people there's an economy of words that you have to use in a song that will teach you how to write sentences, you know, sentences that say something
And
immediately.
choosing the right word.
Yeah, you can't just wander around in a song. You got to, well, you shouldn't be wandering around in, you know, writing anything, and that's what great songwriters can teach you.
And poets, because they've got
That's right.
so little space. Who's got a question?
Well, when I made the comment earlier that I had an overinflated sense of my ability to write when I first started, and part of it was that I was drunk on how much room I had to flesh out something like you're saying, because as a songwriter, I'd been sculpting words down to make them fit into, you know, lines of couplets, you know, A, B couplets or whatever it is. And it's like, I'd been sculpting and sculpting and sculpting, and suddenly with this new canvas, when I first started, it was like Melville, you know, these sentences I couldn't stop a sentence. There was no end. It's like 7. I exaggerate, but you get the gist. It's like suddenly it was like all the room in the world to form, to frame what it was that it impressed me so. And over the process of learning how to do it, to sober up and start, you know, put it into to get it to a publishable stage it was a great experience for me to have to do that. But in the beginning, I was drunk on it for sure.
The dead people can't sue you.
I have we're an adult audience here, adult gathering of people. I have a friend who would say, "Fuck them."
Exactly right. I mean, I feel like you've got to write what you want to write, and you got to please yourself first, and you can't worry that your mother's not going to like it or your cousin's not going to like it. I mean, otherwise, and I've only had writer's block one time where I could not write. It's because I was writing for a guy who made me feel like I didn't know what I was doing. And I wrote a sentence and then I erased it because I thought he won't like it. And then I got up and walked away for 2 or 3 days. Then I came back and that's exactly what I thought, fuck him. And then I wrote it because at that point I thought I had to give the money back if he didn't like it. So my advice is just go and not worry about what anybody thinks and please yourself. Otherwise, you can't worry about others. You'll just be frozen. You're your own audience, I think.
I have, yes, and I hate to tell you that in every case I quit, which was probably the best thing I could have done.
I think I agree. If it doesn't work and you can't make it work, stop trying to make it work. And then it's very freeing to punt, especially if you were right. Of course, if you were wrong, you're never going to know. But I found, like with dialogue, if I rewrite a line and rewrite a line and rewrite a line, I just need to cut it because it's never going to work. And so then you get rid of it. And then you get on with the next thing. Because sometimes knowing that this project, which is my very first question I asked today, was how did you know this was going to be the one you wanted to devote the time to? But sometimes you have to partway through say, this ain't it, and then press on and do something else. Because in theory, there are always other things. But you've never gone back, you've never regretted that you punted one.
No. When I got to the place where I couldn't go any farther, I said, obviously, whatever's out there doesn't want me to do this. And I moved on to something else. But the thing is, a lot of times those things that you have just written parts of, they come in handy later on. A lot of times, they really do. You can use them in something else. Use some of it at least in something else.
Well, even if it never is a bad idea to do, because you're going to be a better writer a week from today than you are today, even if you throw away everything you wrote.
That's right. Yeah.
I would. Songs are different because it's smaller scale, and they happen more quickly than, 250 pages in a book. But I really value the unfinished song because it brings me back to work every day. That song that I want to change or make work, it'll get me back to work. Mm-hmm. Go back to work on that, and it's like, man, and then suddenly the wind shifts and something that's ready to be what it's going to be comes. And it's just, the most important thing is the work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're not, in my case anyway, if I'm not sitting there doing terrible stuff, I'm never going to get to the good stuff. If I sit there and think, well, I'm not getting anything good, I'm going to walk away, it doesn't get good. The only way it gets good is by continuing to pound it for me.
Well, I guess I really haven't gotten that much response on that, but when I do, I mean, one of the things that I point out is that I certainly don't agree with any of Nathan Bedford Forrest's racial views at all. I mean, anybody who doubts that can read a blog I've got, which is called Civil War and Civil Rights, and it's, I have a lot of heroes in the civil rights movement. But the thing that I think I connected with Forrest on from the time I was a kid until now is that Forrest was a product of his place and time, he has always, I think, been looked down on because of where he came from, more than what his views were, because a whole lot of people in the upper crust at that time had exactly the same views, but you don't hear people protesting about them. You know, he's the firebrand, and that probably was because he was a man of action. I think that every time you bring up Nathan Bedford Forrest's name, you ought to also, you ought to point out his titanic flaws. Titanic men usually have titanic flaws. But once you do that, I think that it's unfortunate that now it's only his flaws that get seen. And that's one of the things that I hope that this book does, is to show that there was a reason that a lot of people really admired him until the 1960s came along and enlightened all of us. But there was a reason. I mean, the common people of the South saw Nathan Bedford Forrest as one of them, and they were proud of him because he beat all these other people who were supposedly so much smarter and better educated and everything else than he was, and that they were. I don't.
If telling the truth would expose and destroy a great evil and perhaps yourself, would you go ahead?
Is it worth the risk to tell the truth?
Do you mean destroy your life or destroy your reputation? Or, I mean, if it's your life,
Certain subjects are
no.
taboo, such as
It's a hypothetical that it's hard for me to
Yeah,
get
me
inside of, because the things that I have any real knowledge of, generally speaking, don't go to that place, to something that that has that much potential to destroy.
Bernstein going after Nixon, for example.
Well, I would think that in that case that, you know, the story, when the story's telling itself, I don't think that Bernstein or Wood thought about whether their lives were in danger. That the story's telling itself, and they're the channel. And I don't know that. I wouldn't think that you would have any idea if you were going to get snuffed out for what you've written until after the fact.
Yeah.
It would be hard to know. I mean, if you knew that
Yeah.
going in, you probably wouldn't write it.
Yeah.
And if you wrote something good enough to get snuffed out in the end for, God bless you.
Right. That's right. Right.
Somebody had a question, yeah.
You mean in terms of how long you can write at a time? Is that what you're talking about? That sort of thing? Uh-huh. I find that, you know, myself, maybe 3 hours, maybe three and a half hours at a time is about as much as I can go. But it's hard for me to find 3.5 hours that I can at a time that I can. But you know, I think that, you know, you were asking a while ago about advice. One thing you have to do, I think, is just become very, very friendly with yourself. I mean, a thing that happened to me just a few years ago, I think, is the most pithy and succinct definition of the creative life that I've ever heard with my own ears. One night, a few years ago, my wife and I were invited to a radio, the making of a public radio show where they had some new performers new then in Nashville. And we were lucky enough, I mean really lucky enough, to get seated next to a man who was one of the greatest songwriters in Nashville history. I guess if you put all of Harlan Howard's hits on that wall, they'd probably take up all of it. And anyway, like 2 or 3 performers came out, and finally the third one, I guess, came up to the thing with a guitar, and I'd seen him in a small club here once before, and Harlan leaned over to me and said, "Who's this?" And I said, "That's Keith Urban. He's a young Australian that's come here, and he's really starting to make some noise with his guitar." And so then Keith got up there and proceeded to make noise. I mean, it was something else. He nearly burned the building down. It was amazing. And so he did his couple of songs and walked off, and Harlan leaned over to me and he said, "There's a boy who has spent long hours in a lonely room."
Yeah,
That's pretty
so you
much the
better make
creative
friends
life.
with yourself.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'll answer the same thing. Everybody's different. Cleese is different from you. He's different from me. I mean, and how you get your work done is all up to you. And it's hard to find the right method, I think. I need peace and quiet. One of the places I go is the library, because my wife doesn't know where I am. I said this last time. It obviously is a theme. But you've got to do whatever you can do to find it. And I can sit when I'm alone and I know anything. I can sit for hours and hours and hours and hours and get work done. And I don't ever get tired of it. But if 3 hours is his limit, or an hour and a half or whatever it is, that's fine. If yours is 20 minutes, that's fine. I mean, it's so important not to worry that you're not doing it right.
Yeah, right.
Because otherwise, if you're worried about that, that's not what you need to worry about. I mean, you just need to, and again, we've said, get the first draft out any way you can, and don't worry if it's any good, and then fix it, and then fix it, and then fix it, and then fix it. And so Cleese's method may be perfect for you, or it may be some variation of it, or something completely different. Who else? Somebody had a, yes,
Will,
ma'am.
let me ask one, will you?
Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, I before I asked the question, I just did not do something when we opened that I should have done, and that was to thank Elaine and Elise. I would just tell you, your professionalism is what makes this such a marvelous library, and so thank you very much. I just wanted to ask one question. Rodney has said his book's a love story, and it is. Jack's book, on the other hand, reflects anger, hostility, mean-spiritedness. And I'd just like to ask each of you to recite a quote and perhaps say something about the quote, because each one of these quotes sort of, for me, reflects the love story, the story of vehemence bordering on violence. And the book, and Jack, in your book, it is the quote from the mouth of Nathan Bedford Forrest as he goes to General Bragg and says, "No more, never again." My guess is you can recite it from heart. And then, Rodney, for the love story, the quote you almost delivered when we opened, as you talked about that time you introduced your mom to Roy Acuff. I thought about her and her life with your father, and how tough and at times brutal it was and her quote choked me up. So if you wouldn't mind, just recite the quote, and if you want to say anything about it, would you?
Okay.
Jack first, and then you, Rodney.
Well, Forrest, this was at the end of about 17 months that he had served under this general who did not appreciate his talents at all, and they were huge. But I mean, he just kept handing him slights and demeaning him, and finally, Forrest. The story goes that he accosted Bragg in his tent, and just, he was a left-hander, and he stuck his index finger of his left hand in Bragg's face and started reciting all these things that Bragg had done over these 17 months to him, taking troops away from him. Forrest would train troops, and then they'd take them away and hand him some more brand new ones and all this, and it went on and on, and then Forrest goes through 3 long paragraphs of these things, and finally he ends by saying, you crossed my path again at the peril of your life, and he leaves. That was it. And he went off to West Tennessee and became basically more of a partisan raider, and which is what all Bragg ever thought he was. Just thought he was nothing but an irregular. He would never, anytime, he would send Forrest out on a mission, and he would never give him, even when he had all the materials that he could give him, he would send him off, without. He had to get all his material. He had to capture all his materials from the Federals, and Bragg had 2 generals that he treated like that, John Morgan and Forrest. But John Morgan, that's all Morgan wanted to do, was to be a sort of hide and seek guerrilla. Forrest, all he wanted to do was win the war. He didn't care how he did it, whether he was a cavalryman or what.
Can I borrow your book there?
Sure.
I think got notes. So impressive.
That's not my.
Is this your next book?
No, that's John's book. He sent it to me to read. Yeah.
Oh, is this your book?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. All right. I'm just this, as I said, that my mother and father met at a Roy Acuff concert, and the sweet, at the beginning of the love story is there was a boy harassing my mother, and my father came up and was very cavalier and challenged the boy who was harassing my mother's attention away from the Roy Acuff performance, and my father challenged him to a wrestling match out in the school yard after the show. And the boy went off and got drunk and was no match for my dad, and my dad walked him. My dad walked my mother home, and she went home and told her mother that she had met the man she was going to marry that night. So all these years later, it says the impulse to try to sculpt a narrative out of my family's history started when I remembered introducing my mother to Roy Acuff backstage at the Grand Ole Opry in 1991. Identifying herself as a lifelong fan, she told the most popular country musician of her generation that she had met the love of her life at his concert in the Buchanan High School gymnasium, obliging everyone present, myself included, to imagine this had taken place only a night or 2 before. The courtly superstar paid rapt attention and then said his most treasured memory from that evening was of the two young lovebirds whose faces shone from the audience with the light of love everlasting. That's a pro at work right there. The meeting lasted no more than 3 minutes, but I wish it could have gone on forever. My mother floated out of Mr. Acuff's dressing room an 18-year-old girl again. Why, Rodney? He was just like I always knew he'd be, she said, as dreamily as any girl of her era would have had she chanced to meet her favorite matinee idol. And didn't his hair remind you of your daddy's?
Right.
Which, if you look at this picture, my dad had Roy Acuff's hair exactly. I mean, she was right about that. It's true. Funny thing about this photograph, it just appeared in a stack of photographs when we were trying to figure out how to make a dust jacket for this book. It just came out of nowhere, and I think it really is my favorite picture of my mother and father. My dad looked like a movie star, and my mother looks like she's never been more in love than she is with this rounder. The question was, that's it? That's it? Yeah. It was a great love story between those two.
I want to say one thing before we wrap up, because they're going to close the library in a minute, is normally when you ask an author to come down and talk about his book, he's just got to get in the car and drive down there and talk about the book. It requires zero effort other than the transportation. These guys each had to read each other's books to come down here and do this. And they had to take notes, and they had to do a lot of work and thinking, and it's a pain in the neck. And I really appreciate their effort on y'all's behalf. So thank you.
No pain in the neck for me.
I did write a phone number on the back of your dust jacket, so I did take some notes.